Good morning, everybody, and happy 2023. How are we all doing? It's a little rainy here. Hope we're doing okay. Hey, we're having a webinar, right? When we're talking about the weather or the day or the time, right? Let's talk about irrigation and sheet setup. How about that? It's a good enough topic to have a whole webinar on, everything from, how do you start off of just inserting in a PDF or an image and what are those just obscure little AutoCAD settings that are best to get those line types to plot correctly, and things like that. And being irrigation specific, obviously some of this could really apply to anything, but we get enough of these consistent questions from specifically irrigation designers that it worked to have this be, themed irrigation specific. So it is. I have a couple super quick housekeeping items before we get going. The first is just to remind you that this is being recorded. So it'll be up on the old website later today. And there's a little chat box down there. But if you did want to ask a question, please use the Q&A box, which is different from the chat box. A couple buttons over at the bottom of your screen, Q&A. Any questions you type in there, I will answer. And in fact, if you just click it right now, you can get that little window situated on your screen. What's nice is if you have that up, you're going to see the answers that we type to other people's questions. So it makes kind of a fun little companion. You are watching this live with us right now. And it is Friday the 13th. Nothing could possibly go wrong for our first webinar of the year. So Jake, let's take it away.
Awesome. Thank you for not jinxing this webinar. Welcome, everybody. We have a very full house, so welcome to all you newcomers, existing users, and everywhere in between. We are going to be talking about some sheet setup and plotting stuff, specifically around irrigation. Yes, but like Jared said, it could apply to a lot of different situations. So this is me. I am the irrigation specialist, do a lot of the content creation, training, and really see a lot of different things come in and out from a tech support side. So kind of trying to wrap in a few, people's requests and issues that they've had and try to make this into a webinar here. So the agenda that we're going to be going over, really specifically focusing on number 1 and 2 for the bulk of today, really working with an image, scaling it up properly, setting layers and different things. But not only just working with the image, and this might be a controversial topic to a lot of people, but whether or not we're tracing, what to trace, and then the secondary part of the controversial topic would be setting up those sheets. Really just understanding what you're scaling the viewports to, and how you should really be splitting up a design into multiple sheets, not just why you should, but how to actually accomplish that. And we got some fun little tools to help with that. And then again, just the proper use of that LT scale. This is a long time running issue with a lot of people and different settings and stuff like that. So we are just going to be covering one particular recommended way of this, and we have all kinds of resources on different setup stuff. But and then lastly, if we can get to, some of it is plotting, just some issues with what you might have with your CTB file and what goes wrong, how to change that. And then just working with everything in general with that image, making that line work stand out, making sure things are plotting properly. What we are not going to be covering, and so for those of you joining and kind of curious about really how we're going to fit all this stuff in, we only barely have less than an hour now on covering a lot of stuff. So we are going to be skipping over a lot of the basic CAD drafting stuff. So as I'm going through different workflows, I might start to explain a couple different suggested little tools and tips and tricks, but there should be a basic understanding about how to draft and how to use those tools. So the blue little bullets here are existing webinars that we already have and resources that we have. So we will, in the recording, provide these different links, but just know that these specific blue titles are different webinars that we've actually accomplished that go into this a lot deeper, so that we can kind of focus in on, you know, your questions and just showing off a particular workflow. So really getting from an irrigation design perspective, we are not going to be going through really adding equipment and starting projects and stuff like that. I will make mention of when we should consider these things, but that's as far as we're going to go into those. So from there, we are going to go right over into CAD. So if, like Jer said, if you guys can start queuing up your questions, if you've got them, things that you're hoping to see, maybe we can get those queued up so that we can make sure that we have time to show off that kind of stuff. So we're going to just jump right over into CAD. And the first and foremost thing that we always really want to try to do is setting up our unit store drawing. Okay, just making sure that we understand what the units are right off the get-go, so that we're making the right decisions down the road. Inserting images and stuff like that, and then just drafting the line work and stuff, it really is important that we understand what those units are, because all of that plays into obviously the scale of what things are going to be, what scale we're going to be putting on the drawing. And a reminder that the scale, when I talk about scale from a plotting perspective, that's the 1 inch equals 20 or the 1 to 10 or whatever it is that way. When we're talking about images and scaling images, that's just to make sure that we're getting it to the right real world size. Okay. Everything else is when we get into the plotting side of things and setting up the actual sheet. So we need to bring in an XREF. Okay. This base map that we start our irrigation plan from needs to be an XREF of some sort. So for our purposes, we are going to be using a JPEG. It is obviously better to get that DWG, the base line work, the site plan, the planting plan, that kind of stuff as a DWG. It's just cleaner that way, but I know it's not always possible. So what we're going to go through is bringing in an actual image of a site and kind of scaling it up and working from that. So we are going to still be typing in the XREF command. This is going to be where we actually attach that image. Okay, an image is still an XREF. It's just not a DWG option. So we'll go up to this top left corner and we'll choose the attach image option. Doing this is going to let you browse for that image. Again, proper file organization and stuff like that should be followed still. So I've got a JPEG in an XREF folder that I'll be able to reference. So we'll go ahead and open him. And we're not going to worry about the insertion point or the scale, because generally speaking, you're never going to get an image that is to the correct scale to begin with. And since we're starting this plan, we just want everything to go to 0, 0. So unchecking both of these is just going to allow that image to insert into the plan. Now it went to 0, 0, and it went to just a small little tiny size probably. So I do need to zoom extents. So I can type Z, enter, E, enter for zoom extents, and that image will pop right in. Okay, so now we have the image. And obviously checking my units, we were in decimal feet. So we could start drawing on top of this if we wanted to, but obviously there's a really big issue with that, is that nothing is probably to scale. So we need to scale this guy up. Now, those of you joining us live, this is a really neat, fun little tool. We all might be familiar with the scale command and using the reference command. We've actually just introduced, or we're introducing live right now, a new command called scale reference. So FX scale reference, if you type that into the command line, is going to allow you to pick an object. So we'll go ahead and pick this image, and we'll pick the first point. And we're looking at the command line here for those prompts. And so I know I have a little scale reference, or a distance reference here that I'm going to pick. So we're going to go ahead and pick a first point, and it says to go ahead and pick that second point for that existing reference distance. So I'll get as close as I think I can on that image. And now we are prompted with this dialog box that shows us what that reference length was and what we want that reference length to be. And I just say, okay. And it automatically will zoom it and scale it for us that way. So it's a lot cleaner than going through all of the little steps from that scale reference command, but essentially doing the same thing. So now when we get this thing scaled, obviously we can trust but verify. So I can run the distance command and just check something in the plan to make sure that we're kind of good. And you'll notice that I'm picking some arbitrary points, obviously, in this thing. And 8.7, that's pretty close to that, probably 9-ish foot stall width. So I know we're good on the scale of this deal. We can obviously measure the 200 feet again. And if I do that, you'll notice I'll click roughly where I clicked before, and it's not quite 200 feet. It's because we're just still picking pieces of an image. And so one of the biggest issues with working with images is the inconsistency of where you're picking stuff. So we could use this as it sits right now and do our design on top of it. But we want to make it usable and as usable as possible and consistently, get the same results consistently that way. And that is by tracing the image. Now, we should be looking at proper layers at this point on what layers that trace line work should be on and that stuff. But we should even consider what layer this image is actually on. And you'll notice that he's actually set to layer 0 for this image, and that's probably not the best place for that image to be for several reasons. But one, we don't have control over how light or dark this image is, setting a transparency to it. We don't have control other than it being an XREF on how to turn it on and off. So we do want to set this to the right layer. Now, if I open my layer properties manager, type LA or layer, open that up, you'll notice I have a couple layers, but that's just because I have a title block in this sheet. But what if we didn't have any layers set up and ready to go? If we're not using under the FX admin tab, the load and save layers tools, that is definitely a really, really handy way to get the layers that we want in there. So if I go ahead and hit load layers, LandFX has some pre-set up layers that we can kind of look through and see. So if I had like a site base set, it automatically loads up a ton of different layers that deal with site. So I could go through and I could load layers and I could get in landscape edging layers or some irrigation layers or whatever the layer set that I wanted. Maybe I even have an existing template that has those there. Well, I can clean this up to the list that I want it to show. And if I have these layers, in the layer properties manager like this, I could use that save layers tool and save that into the system, into that location so that I could load those up properly each time. So for example, I'll go ahead and purge because we do run purges on drawings every once in a while. And if those layers aren't used, they get cleared out. And so how do we have to recreate those every time, right? Well, how do we do that seamlessly? And that is with just being able to load those layers back in as needed. So I made a little general tracing set of layers, which threw in this deal. And I even have a Z image XREF layer, and he's actually already set to a transparency. So for this purpose, I'm going to remove this image and I'm going to do it again with these layers actually active. And so I'm kind of backtracking here because I wanted to show what it looks like when you bring in an image nice and dark when I'm drawing stuff. Maybe I'm trying to trace this stuff and it's really, really hard to see, you know, the actual lines that I'm tracing in here, right? It's very, very hard to trace. Well, I'm going to go ahead, open up that XREF manager. I'm going to right click on that option and I'm going to detach it. That's going to remove it from the list. And we'll go ahead and reinsert that image just real quick. Since I loaded those layers and it set my image XREF layer active from the very beginning, I know when I start a drawing and I bring in an image, it's going to go ahead and put this XREF, this image, on that layer from the beginning. So we can zoom extent and you can see he's a lot lighter right from the beginning. So having a pre-set up layer with a transparency is going to save us a lot of headaches just down the road on when we start actually using an image. So now that he's there, we'll go ahead and run that scale reference command. Pick that object. And it is very, very good to try to pick consistently 2 known points in the plan. The further away from each other, the better. So I would not want to try to scale this this image off of a parking stall, especially from an image perspective. The larger 2 points that we can click that are kind of arbitrary and we don't have a snap point that we know the exact distance, the better, because it will scale, or everything will be closer in their relative distances in the long run. Okay, so we'll go ahead and pick 200 feet. And it's been scaled. So now we're good to go. Using this image, we know this is now scaled and ready. So he's on the proper layer. I already have some layers that I can now start looking at and go, okay, let's go ahead and throw in some road edges, right? So we can start to determine what we trace. Now, I don't want to have to sit here and trace every single thing in this drawing. So I can now take this time to kind of assess the site and see what it is that I actually need to show, right? What are my irrigated areas? What are the areas that are going to be within the work limits, and start tracing just those. And the reason I just need those is that will allow me to turn off this image and I still have reference to what the site is and where I'm actually putting stuff. Okay. So we're going to, and I'm going to just show a couple little fun tools right now, but we'll jump ahead in just a second. As I'm drawing, I'm actually going to do some existing buildings here. I can use a polyline, and I'd recommend using polylines as much as possible, but because it just has so many more editing capabilities. But if you're not familiar with tracing images, we're obviously limited and have like a little bit of a disadvantage here for shadows and the tall buildings and the building leans and the different skews that might happen in an image. So you do got to be, aware of where things might be. And it's very, very advantageous to actually go out onto the site if you can, after an initial trace, to be able to confirm and verify some of the distances that you've done, so you can make some tweaks along the way. So I can see that the actual sidewalk does come kind of into the building here. So I could technically start working off of the image, and I could see maybe a little bit of the sidewalk at that point. So I could sort of guess on where things are, and I could kind of align myself and just start tracing stuff. But it's really hard with this little off-cantered building set to use like some nice ortho snaps that keep things in this nice 90-degree angle, right? So what I can do is use our X-hair command, our X-hair angle. This is located on the FX Site tab as a big, nice button. But if you're using our quick access toolbar, it is right here as well. What this allows us to do is actually click 2 points, and again, we're in an image here, so it's sort of arbitrary. But if we can kind of generally line ourselves up with those corners, Land Effects will align the crosshairs automatically for us here. So as I start using my polyline tool, I can turn on ortho and be snapped in and start lining up my edges this way, right? So now I can very quickly start doing this. And you'll notice that if I start tracing this, well, I'm off on the actual landscape edges. So I do need to understand as I'm going through tracing this that I'm focused on the landscape areas, not some of those building line edges, right? Little tips and tricks along the way here, right? I could go to this other side and just skip the arcs altogether and just sort of go along the edges if I wanted to. And then when I'm done, I could technically come back to those guys, hover over this guy, press the C button, or pick Convert to Arc, and position those guys back to where they should be. I could also, as I'm going along, and we'll go ahead and snap to ortho. We'll just snap along here. I can go to the tangent of where that arc ends, and I can use the arc option, and I can kind of fit it within there in that range of arc. And I can turn it back to a line, but that's not a line, right? That's an arc. So I can position him, turn it to a line, start coming up until it starts to get to that tangent and turn it to an arc. And we can very, very easily start finding where that arc either shifts or makes a harder angle for a different tangent there. So I can go ahead and click there, and I can finish him off to that point, go to a line, and basically close him off like that. So really quickly, we can start making these areas that we want to trace pretty quickly with the actual layers that we've kind of set up. And you'll notice that as I'm panning around, that's another reason that we want that line work, right? Is CAD has to try to regenerate the image and process this image. It's a lot more taxing on the system. So if we're able to, and we get enough line work in there, we can temporarily turn that image off so that we can work. And if we need it, we can turn it back on, kind of a thing. Okay. So let's just jump ahead, and I've traced all that I want to. Okay. So we are now at the point of basically, what do I do now with this traced image? Well, I do not want to actually start my design right here, because now what I've just created is that XREF base line work that's essentially a DWG now. I could just simply, I can keep that image there just in case I needed it, but I can unload him, right click and unload him. And now I have this line work that I can use as an XREF. Okay. So with that, I'm just going to jump to the next deal and have a starting blank slate for an irrigation plan. Okay. This is where my irrigation plan starts. This is not where I just start placing all my equipment and stuff. I'm still setting up my sheet at this point. But I'm going to go ahead and XREF that DWG, this site-based final, is going to be my XREF DWG that I put in here as my line work. Okay. So I can still go back and attach that DWG. If people are not using FXRef, I would highly recommend using that just because it's a lot cleaner and a lot simpler. But I'm going to grab that site-based final, and FXRef allows me to, and the reason that I was able to click this button here in the XREF manager is because I actually replaced that button with the FXRef tool. But this is going to give us this image as an overlay. It actually allows me to move around and see how that image has been XREF'd into the plan before even accepting it in. And that's another really cool reason FXRef is nice, because you can validate, you can run different commands and test how things are actually sized and run some verification before actually allowing it to be XREF'd into your drawing. So everything seems to be good. It cross-checks me on everything is set up, and I'm going to say okay. So now I'm ready to design, right? Almost. So now that everything is actually geared up and ready for us to place, everything's traced, I can still right-click on this image in my XREF manager and unload him. Okay. So now that he's unloaded, I really don't need to worry about using that image quite yet. If I wanted to underlay it for final printing and stuff, that's great. He's there. But I want to just be able to work a little bit more seamless and not so chuggy with an image there attached. So I'm going to focus kind of on these two little areas here, because our next kind of game plan here is really figuring out our final scale, right? We know that when we start an irrigation plan, now that I've got everything XREF'd, I need to set up my project for the equipment that's going to be held. It's going to have my preference set assigned, but we need to set the land effects plot scale. This is one of the times when you start inserting irrigation equipment that it needs to know how big to make those symbols, because it needs to know what size you're going to be plotting these at. Okay, so here's where actual scale comes into play, and how we need to start to lay out our sheets in order to know what scale would best fit. Now, I know I might ruffle a few feathers here, and I understand that there's a lot of different regulations and restrictions to what scale that you have to abide by on certain projects. I get that there's conditions for all of this stuff, but for the most part, a landscape or an irrigation plan and our symbols are geared around a 1 inch equals 20 foot layout. Not to say that we can't do any other size, but and it totally depends on the scale of the site, right? We might have some really large areas, and we might have some really small areas. So how are we doing this? I guess the most economical way in general. And obviously, multiple sheets is not a problem. It's just you want to try to fit as much as you can on a sheet. We get that, but to what extent, right? So if we want to try to figure out how these areas are going to lay out on sheets, we could, and I'm just going to do this right here. I have a 24 by 36 sort of set up so that we can kind of see what's going on here. And I should have set that here. So this is essentially what my full site looks like. And I know that my viewport is going to be this big so that I have a little bit of room for my notes and schedules and whatnot. If I go ahead and try to fit these areas in here, I can start to see that I might want to turn this guy a little bit so that he's a little bit more landscape oriented. I might want to turn him so that he's more landscape oriented a different way, right? So how do we accomplish all those things? And I'm thinking about these things before I start placing my heads. I'm thinking about this before I'm setting my scale so that I can figure out how it's going to best lay out. I might have this section right here in the middle that looks like he would fit really nice straight up and down this way. Okay, So obviously we're not going to rotate the plan, but we can set a UCS. And I'm going to just do this in model space. We could have done it through the viewport there, but for this purpose, well, I'll just be here in model space. Here's another reason why we're tracing this image. It is a lot easier to use this new UCS tool that we have to be able to click an origin point, to be able to snap to an actual segment of the x-axis direction. As soon as I click on a line, I can actually tell the system which way is up. So I'll go ahead and say this way is going to be up. I can give it a name. I'm not going to because I actually already did. So I'm going to just pick that one really quick. And it's going to orient itself this way. As soon as you give it the name, it's going to orient itself this way, or in the direction that you set it up. So now I have this positioned. It can lay out really nice on the sheet. And I might have another area, right? So this Restore UCS tool allows me to pick through the different UCSs that I've actually set up. So we'll go ahead and we'll do one more, and we'll do this middle area. We'll call him entry. Okay, so I have these different UCSs now that I can kind of tweak and use as I start doing my design. Okay, so in general, when you're doing a plan, and let's say this is going to be the entire site, and I have these different larger and smaller areas, I might need to show the entire site at a scale on a plan just to show it, but that's really not where the detail is actually coming into play. It's really up to the specific area that you should be really designing to. So what that actually looks like and how much I can fit on a sheet is still going to help determine what scale we do as a design is concerned, right? So for this purpose, I'm going to go ahead and restore, and let's go ahead and do this baseball diamond section. So we're going to just come back over to our sheet here, and we're going to activate that viewport, and I'm going to restore that same baseball diamond deal. So how do I know how much I can actually fit here? Well, I need to now play around with the scale. I'm still, before placing anything, I am in this figuring out what the scale is. And let's just say I am forced to use the scale. Well, I can still see what me being forced to that scale is, right? So maybe it's 1 to 30 is our scale. If I'm in an active viewport and I run that land effects plot scale, it's going to ask if I want to scale that. I'm going to say yes. So that's at 1 to 30. Now you might think, perfect, I can fit everything in there. Well, to what extent, right? It's better to actually show the detail at a tighter scale than try to fit everything in there and have it not be legible, right? Because 1 to 30 is probably just too small to see everything on that large deal, even on a 24 by 36. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to change him to 1 to 20 and see what that looks like. Well, now it's just too big, right, for that. And I might be able to increase the viewport and have it just be all on that one sheet, and that's great. But I know that I want more information on the sheet. So this is one of those situations that would lend to things needing to be on a different sheet, okay? Let's just look at this area really quick. As a case in point, we'll do the open space. We'll pivot him around and we will kind of set his scale to 1 to 20 and see. You can see that it's also just not advantageous for us to do. So I could fit this into 2 sheets and I could fit the other side into 2 sheets. Really not the end of the day, but what that's going to give us is a better legibility for the symbols. Things are going to fit a lot better than trying to jam those into a larger scale. Okay. Now, how do I exactly know where to line up the sheets though, right? That's the biggest issue. And I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of people don't split into sheets is because they're just not comfortable with how to lay it out. So I'm going to go over a fun little trick on how we might be able to do this and show you a cool little block that I've created that if there's enough requests for it, maybe we make it a land effects one. But this is our viewport, right? This is a standard sheet that I've got set up. This is a 24 by 36. I might want to consistently show something, within that viewport that is that fits this, right? So I don't want to max it out to the edge. I want to kind of see the peripheral side so that as I'm lining up these sheets, when they're printed out, I can see a little bit past what is actually in that next sheet kind of a thing, so that as I line them up, I know that this is where it's supposed to go. I don't want to max it out and not have any reference. So I do want to sort of show a little bit offset inside of this, okay? Now, you'll notice that I drew this rectangle in paper space, and I did it within the parameters of this viewport, okay? I'm going to double click inside the viewport just to confirm that my scale is set correct. Okay, so this 1 inch equals 20 feet is important because what I'm going to run this next command is going to size and scale this this rectangle and put it into model space, assuming you have the viewport set to whatever scale you change that space from. Okay, so with me being in paper space, I can select that kind of preview rectangle, and I can type CH space for change space. This is an AutoCAD command. It's a really cool command. But if I run change space, it automatically moved that square into model space. Okay, so if I go back over to model space, and we'll go ahead and we'll restore this open space guy, you can see that it inserted that rectangle. That's pretty cool, right? So now I can actually move him around, and I know that I can fit this much stuff within that viewport at a 20 scale. Okay. And I can take that and I can copy him and kind of line him up and see exactly how many sheets I'm going to need, right? That's pretty useful. But what if I could make a block that allowed me to already know what my viewport size was and allow me to toggle between different scales so that I don't even have to sit there and the last 5 minutes of me talking to you about that, we wouldn't even need to do that, right? So I'm going to pull open this block. I've saved it in my discipline graphics under a sheet layout section, and I have a sheet layout preview block. And this one's geared towards a 24 by 36, and it's geared towards that size viewport, just like we did. But when I insert it, it comes in, and I'm just going to select him so you can see he's a dynamic visibility states block where I can actually see at different scales what would fit in that viewport. So without needing to sit there and keep changing that viewport scale to see really what fits in the sheet, as soon as I bring in this XREF and I'm setting up my irrigation plan, I can insert this block and I can toggle him around to see what my sheet layouts are going to start looking like. So then I can take him and I can copy select and snap him to those edges really quickly. If I had another area, so let's go ahead and restore that baseball diamond section. I can go ahead and insert that block again. and we can change him to 1 to 20. And you can see he's just barely going to fit. But I can go ahead and copy select. Put him in there, right? So very quickly, I can put him in. And the cool thing about this block is that the layer that line work is on is non-plot. So when I'm in here and I'm ready to kind of line up my sheets, I can position him around so that I see where he's at. But when I plot him and I preview, I don't see that boundary, right? And I could make him plottable so that I can see that boundary, but I'm going to show you another block in a little bit once we actually do our proper sheet setup. I'm just showing you within the actual irrigation file itself, without having to do much work, we can really determine what our scale should actually be set to so that we can just do the work at the proper scale. So I've decided 1 to 20 is the proper scale for being able to fit this stuff in. At this point, you know, I could turn off this layer if I wanted to and just keep them in there for reference. But I'm going to go ahead and just delete them, and I would do my design, right? So at this point, I'm going to pause for a second. And Jer, is there any questions leading up into this point before we kind of move to the next deal?
We've had some fantastic questions. I think we're good. It'd be nice to let people know that that awesome scale reference command that you showed is posting with the update later today.
Yep.
So that'll be pretty cool. And otherwise, I think I answered everyone's questions so far. So, but we'll have a little time at the end to revisit questions if necessary.
Okay, cool. And if anybody has questions about the setup of the block itself, I'm happy to answer those questions, because again, it does require, you know, your template and the way that your viewport is laid out as like the starting point of everything. And it does require some initial setup to make sure that those toggleable visibility state block line work is kind of set properly to those. But I do find it really, really useful to kind of set up that block instead of sitting in a viewport trying to figure out what is going to fit. You can do all of that without that step, which is really, really nice. Okay. Now, we are doing all of this still before placing anything, because we do want to make sure that we set the scale right and that we are, you know, properly putting in the UCS options as we see fit. Because as we start doing our design, I think one of the biggest issues that we're definitely still tackling is, as I, you know, place pieces of equipment, you know, I'm going to go ahead and just place a couple things in here, just kind of arbitrary, so don't judge my design. But with this line work now, I have this ability to obviously use the line work that we've created instead of just the image, right? So there's a lot more benefits just in general from creating the line work versus not, right? So to be able to use all of that line work to our advantage is super important as we're doing actual irrigation design. We wouldn't be able to do that. Well, there's a way to accomplish that still, but not as efficiently as just creating the line work from the beginning. Okay. But you'll notice that as I place stuff in here, this is where an understanding of obviously the UCS and the layout style that we did is important, right? We don't want to do the entire design in this kind of fashion where we lay out all of our heads and everything is faced a certain way, and then we realize, oh, we need to plot this, this other way. And so when we get this guy over into the proper location, everything is rotated, right? And that's what we're trying to solve right up front, is how am I laying this stuff out? Where am I positioning things? How am I getting it set up so that I can get positioned in the right spot to then do my layout of all of the irrigation equipment. So that's the most important thing of what we're trying to convey here. So jumping ahead into we'll call final layout and plotting stuff, is we've done our final plan and we need to lay these out on sheets. I know a lot of people do everything into one file. We always say don't put all of your eggs in one basket, because we've seen way too many times corruption or different things happen to the file where you lose everything. It really should be, from a sheet setup perspective, a layout is its own individual file. And what that allows you to do is there's a lot more flexibility as it comes to the line type issues, and especially if we're using multiple scales on different parts of the drawing. There's not a perfect way in one file to accomplish, there's no way actually to accomplish multiple scales of that same line type in a single drawing. You're always sitting there toggling. And so if we have the ability to actually start a drawing, making sure that your LT scale is set to 1 and your PSLT scale is set to 1, and you reference in, so we're going to go ahead in my blank L101 file, we're going to go ahead and we're going to reference in the site base so that we have that reference. And we're going to reference in our irrigation plan. Okay, so with these two different plans XREF'd in, I'm not worried about what my line type is, again, in my actual file here in model space, because all I'm focused on is how I'm actually going to be displaying stuff here. Now, you can go ahead and ignore that guy because I was going to show you something, but I'm not. So within the actual viewport now, we'll go ahead and get to a place where there's some line type differences. No matter what the actual scale is set to the drawing, so go ahead and set it to 20 because we decided that was going to be our proper size. And we regen that plan. I'm going to turn off this for a second. You can see that our line types are appropriate. If I were to randomly make another viewport then that was showing at a different scale, and let's just go ahead and restore this. Here's what's really cool about still being able to set a UCS in a sheet layout, right? Well, we want to do it all in one drawing because we have all of our views and UCS is set and everything like that. Well, the restore UCS tool will actually pull in the UCS that is in the XREF that you pull in. So you don't have to recreate those every time, which is really nice. So we can set it up in our working drawing, the UCS, do our design, and then go into our sheet set like we have right here and still set it to the same exact UCS because it's pulling those in. So that's a really cool feature. I believe that was a Stantec, Steve Cook request.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very cool option. So we'll go ahead and rotate that around, and we'll go ahead and set scale here to 10, not 1020. Okay, so here is our deal. And if I regen, everything matches, okay? So I have a fail-safe, fail-proof like way of setup if I can just keep my layout and LTSCALEs set appropriately in my my sheet set, and allow my LTSCALEs to show properly as I'm doing my irrigation plan. Because obviously we did our, oops, I didn't actually open up that plan. We did our final irrigation drawing at a specific scale. So the LTSCALE matches that so we can actually see everything that we're doing. And then it comes all together here. So if I were to even go as far as putting in a detail, even at a completely different scale, we'll go ahead and put him right here. Sheet number L101. And we'll go say, okay. Oh, just joking. 102. I forgot that I was already setting things up. And we place this detail into this drawing. He's a little overlappy, so ignore him. But you can see that his line types are also all consistently showing up. So we can have all of these different scales set up if we are XREFing that final working drawing into an actual sheet and setting it up that way, okay? And again, placing that preview layout block into that irrigation file is going to allow you to reference that actual point for your next sheets. So you can have multiple files holding that one sheet while still referencing the same location. You don't have to sit there and try to line things up. You already have that reference point of where it goes as you insert XREF that guy in. So with that being said, we're going to show you one last little thing here before we do a little bit of plotting. Is I'm going to, since I deleted those other ones, you shouldn't be like me, don't delete those blocks. We'll go ahead and insert them into here, and I should actually get set up really quick into our open space. And we'll go ahead and pick our sheet layout preview. And we'll go ahead and change him. Okay. So now I can kind of make that decision on where he's at based on the actual layout of the pipe and stuff like that. But that gives me a pretty good indication on where he's at. So we'll go ahead and come over to L101. I'm going to show you one last really cool little block that might be really nice. Actually, it's weird. Oops, should have done that. Weird that he's just off kiltered. What I snapped to. Okay, we'll leave him there. Okay, so now I'm going to make sure my scale's right. I kind of position him where I want him. Since we are in our own sheet layout, I have this additional block that goes in paper space, and this is our match line block. And this one's really neat. So obviously we're going to need to know what the sheets are called. And I guess I kind of skipped that part. So let me back up. I apologize. As we're kind of figuring out what the sheets are called and stuff like that, I have created in FX site under text manager, I've actually created a sheet number reference style. Okay. This text style is dedicated for, and it's a big point font size. It's got its own dedicated layer. And to be able to drop him in and say, this is L101, this is L102, right? Just as reference. And obviously this layer can be set to non-plot so that it actually doesn't show up, but it's there for your reference. You can turn it on and off. Now I have kind of a guide, so to speak, on what sheet I'm trying to line these edges up to, right? So without needing to do too much, I'll go ahead and grab that match line block, and I will put him along this edge, and it prompts me for the sheet number. I'll say okay. And if I select that block, I have a bunch of different options. I can actually drag him up and match to the position that he's at. If I wanted to switch where that text is or where that fill is, I also have that option. So this dynamic block allows me to very quickly set things up this way. If I had another sheet up at the top, I could obviously put him right there, and maybe that was L115. And you can connect him into however you want to show him. Right? So with that, you now have, and again, these layers are set up so that as I print this, preview him, you can see he's just grayed out, but again, that initial block that we used so that we could save some space on the outside to show the what's happening on the peripherals there is still there, and everything is kind of legible for us to go. So I know there's kind of some requests for being able to step-by-step make these blocks. We have actual power tips that go over how to actually make dynamic blocks with flip states and with stretch parameters and those things. I just utilize those to put together my own little block. But again, if these are requested enough and think it'll save you enough time, I think those go into our downloadable blocks and are there for your use, because I know that would have saved me a lot of time back in the day. So we're going to stop there for any last questions, and then we're going to just show the last little plot deal, Jer.
Yeah, I think definitely. Yeah. Well, if there's any remaining questions you guys have that you either don't feel I answered appropriately or didn't quite, want to just see again, anything like that, here's your last chance to real quickly type in a question in that little Q&A. But Jake is going to show how to fix a common plotting issue ever since we had to revise our mask colors. The backstory is the legacy land effects CTB file that my dad and I set up going back to the early 90s, but transitioned. It was so far back, we never set a color for 0% screening. And I believe it wasn't an option in the early 90s, but maybe we just weren't thinking. I don't know. But anyway, so there was no color in the Land Effects CTB repository with the 0% screening. And of course, it's very helpful to have in a block to have a solid fill with a 0% screen. Gives you a really simple, effective mask. So we had to pick a color. We had to pick a color to be screened at 0%. And so this changeover means that people with existing installs go to print, and Jake's going to show what that is and then how to fix it.
Cool. So this is actually a sort of a double issue, right? We have our model space working. Line types show up great, but when we go into our plan and we actually do a plot and we preview that guy, he's solid. So not only solid there, but like you see, things might just be straight up black on the masks, or straight white, whatever your background preview is. But so that right there. So we'll handle this non-dash, the solid line, really quick first. Here again is why we recommend putting those drawings, XREFing those into their own sheet file with the PS and LT scale set to 1, because you cannot have the LT scale to 1 and PS LT scale to 1 and show the right size without manually adjusting the object types scale differently. You can't show it. So in order to show it into paper space with in the same drawing as your model, PS LT scale actually needs to be set to 0. You need to turn that off so that it ignores and regen the plan, and it will show up so that when you actually plot, it will show up this way. Okay, so that's our first one. Second is everything to do with the color itself. So CTB file related, and obviously mine says bad, so it's a hint that I've already played with it. But color 133, actually, how do I figure out what color that actually is? You run the X layer command. If you're not using X layer, it is awesome. And depending on what you're clicking on, you have to kind of see where it is. This one, I think, is one of those guys. Oh, duh. I'm in paper space. I need to be actually where the object is, X layer. And click on that guy. And not only will it tell you kind of what it is, but right off the bat, it can, or it will allow you to change the color, but that's not a permanent fix. We'd want to make sure we do that in the right spot. But it's just really nice to have this control here. So that's our LK Anno mask. This is the color that it's set to. So now we know color 133 is that color that we're looking for. So we'll go ahead and check in our plot style table here, the little plotter, edits him. We'll go look for color 133, and we'll see that he's actually screened to 100%, which is full solid. So we'll go ahead and we'll change him back down to 0. And we'll save and close. And we'll say preview. And everything shows up and everything is right in the world. So I think we're going to leave it there. We're a couple minutes over, but any last questions?
I think, how come we didn't have a glitch if it's Friday the 13th? I was led astray. Something was supposed to go wrong.
I could probably glitch something really quick for you if it'll make you feel better.
But everyone have a great, safe weekend. And if it's raining like it is here, try to stay dry and keep that water out of your house. But have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks, guys.